Hello, welcome back. Today on Retro Recon, we're going to dance to Tom Paine's Bones. If you've never heard that before, here's a little, let's see if I can get this to play right.
One evening, by a river of discontent,
I do not own the rights to this music.
Said I can't start right now, child. King George is after me. He'd have a rope around my throat and hang me on the Liberty Tree. Dance to Tom Paine's bones. Dance to Tom Paine's bones. Dance in the oldest boots.
Good stuff, right? Tom Paine's Bones. Now, you may have heard that before. If you're an American patriot, right? You may have heard this. You may have studied the American Revolution. I'm sure, hopefully, everyone out there has heard of Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine is a pretty important guy, interesting guy as well. I mean, he's, kind of cut his teeth as a corset maker. So he went from being a corset maker, amongst other things, to being one of the most influential, basically, political philosophers of a very revolutionary era, and was involved in two revolutions. Pretty important guy. Now, the reason I'm coming to Tom Paine today is yesterday I was talking to a colleague of mine. Shout out to Professor Lauren Wright. We were talking about Tom Paine's Bones, and that's what we're going to get into today because they're pretty significant. And it's an interesting story if you don't already know what happened to Tom Paine and his bones, and how maybe some of you out there could actually be in possession of pieces of Tom. It's not altogether impossible. Anyway, so let's get into it. First off, Thomas Paine. Now, if you don't know who Thomas Paine is, hopefully you do. He was a pretty important guy. He wrote the Bible, as they say, of the American Revolution, right? He wrote a very important pamphlet called Common Sense, which is going to inspire a lot of people, especially, the founding generation, to declare independence and lead to the American Revolution. So Thomas Paine is extremely important. In fact, I have to give a quote. One of my favorite Thomas Paine quotes. This would be a great tattoo. If you want to get a, patriotic tattoo, this would be one to do, right? Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Thomas Paine. Now, that was not in Common Sense. That was in another pamphlet called The American Crisis in 1776. So Tom Paine had a way with words. That's just a wonderful quote. It is really, really awesome. And I should also mention that Lauren, who I mentioned earlier, is having her class right now read Common Sense. So, it's everybody should, give it a whirl. Look at it. See the kind of things that inspired a revolution. Now, Paine, after the American Revolution, it wasn't like he was done. He decides to go to France, and he stirs stuff up over there. He's going to write some more things. The Rights of Man is another one. Him and Thomas Jefferson are going to stir it up big time in France. It's going to lead to all kind of stuff. Well, if you know anything about the French Revolution, you know this thing devolves into just horrible violence, and people get their heads chopped off, and regicide and all kinds of things, right? Now, he does write that. He's involved over there, and he's actually imprisoned for a little, a period of time. James Madison, the father of the U.S. Constitution, actually uses his influence to get Thomas Paine freed. Now, later on, Thomas Paine will become even more outspoken, right? He writes The Age of Reason. He criticizes religion, does a lot of different things. He makes a lot of people very uncomfortable, and also, to be honest, just ticks them off. He says some terrible things about George Washington. Washington ends up hating the guy, because he says he starts really talking bad about Washington. He says other negative things. People really don't want him around. He's kind of persona non grata, really, is what it boils down to. However, there's one guy, Thomas Jefferson. He says, all right, come on back home, Tom. Come hang out at Monticello with me. So he does. Thomas Paine returns to America eventually. He comes back, and that is where he will eventually die, in America. So now, but you think the story ends there, right? This is Thomas Paine has passed away, so that's the end of the story. But guess what? It's not. It's not the end of the story. This is just the beginning. So as it goes, there's this guy named William Cobbett, and William Cobbett was a critic of Thomas Paine during his life. Now, after Paine dies, Cobbett kind of changes his tune and says, "Wait a minute, maybe I'm not so." Upset with Tom anymore. So I want to do something nice for him. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to dig him up and I'm going to take him back to England and we're going to bury him over there. Right? That's the plan. We're going to bury him in Europe. So he does. He digs him up, takes him back home, and Cobbett holds on to the bones. He just he chills with them. He doesn't really like bury them again, which is an unfortunate kind of thing because you're just hanging out with remains, but he does totally. And then Cobbett will pass away. Now, once he passes away, he has yet to rebury the bones of Thomas Paine. So what's going to happen to him? Well, here's where it gets really, really interesting. These things are auctioned off. They are sold to the highest bidder. There are, there's evidence all the way in Australia that people have pieces of Tom Paine. His bones are actually fashioned into buttons that are sold everywhere. And his bones kind of make the rounds. They go all over. They're here. They're there. It's a really fascinating story when you get down to it because, we don't know exactly where they all went. There's no way to find it out, right? Now, we do know for a fact today that his brain stem, is in New York. We do know that. It didn't make its way back to New York. It is in the Thomas Paine Museum in Rochelle, New York. So, there's that. But these things are, every now and again, they say, if you like to go to antique shops, right? And you like to, check things out, look for old stuff like my wife does. My wife loves to go to antique shops and rummage sales and, flea malls, all that good stuff. So if you do buy something, a button, this is likely not going to happen because there's a lot of age involved here. These things are really, really old. And normally someone has possession of them or someone is keeping them and not selling. But every now and again, these things will come up and you have like a button or maybe even jewelry that could potentially have Tom Paine as part of it. Literally his entire, DNA, I guess. So, but basically, poor old Tom Paine, he ends up, there's pieces of him everywhere. And thus the song, Tom Paine's Bones. I'm going to dance with Tom Paine's bones. Great song, too, right? So that is kind of the story of Thomas Paine. He's an interesting guy. He's a lot of fun. But in talking about Thomas Paine, I got to thinking about some other things, right? I got to thinking about Oliver Cromwell is another example of this. Oliver Cromwell, pretty well-known guy. I'm not going to go too deep into the history here because I don't want to bore you too much, but there's this thing called the Interregnum in England. Oliver Cromwell actually is named Lord Protector. Now, this is after they have deposed the king, King Charles I, and he ends up being executed. Long story. I'm not going to get into the weeds on this thing. But what happens, Oliver Cromwell kind of takes over. He's the Lord Protector, kind of like, the king in a way, but not really. But he is in charge, right? And he does a lot of things like in the New World with, the colonies and things. He sends, a lot of exploration and different stuff. Anyway, so here's the thing. Cromwell lived a, natural long life. No one killed him or anything. He lived and was buried with honors, right? In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, what was left of him, except for one big spot, I think is in Westminster Abbey. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure when we went to Westminster, I saw Oliver Cromwell's, where he would have rested at least. But what happens is, okay, so about 3 years after, now that, once you have this interregnum, eventually you have something that's called the Restoration, okay? And they restore the monarchy. Okay, all right. Now, long story short, they're pissed. Excuse my language, but they're ticked at Oliver Cromwell at this time, so they want to punish him, but he's dead. So what do you do when somebody's dead and you want to punish him? Well, you dig him up, and that's what they did. They cut his head off. I mean, or what was left. I mean, they took his head, the remains of his head, and they put it on a pike, and it stood as like a warning for years. This thing. Well, eventually, there was bad weather or something, and this thing actually fell off. And there was a guy that found it. And this thing has traveled. I mean, the stories about where Oliver Cromwell's head went are just amazing when you think about them. They're really fun. Not for him. I mean, well, he was dead though. He didn't know. But so there's that. Now, eventually it's buried again because the family got a hold of it and they actually did bury it somewhere. I don't know that they ever disclosed where they buried the head, but Oliver Cromwell did finally get to his final resting place, right? So there is that. But see, these things happen in history. You have all these times. I mean, not only are do people die? I mean, constantly because of things that they've done, right? But they dig them up after they die, right? It's crazy. Now, a lot of these stories, though, since I'm on this, and this is kind of an offshoot of all this. Some of these stories, like these, are true. What I just told you is 100%, 100, 110%. This is definitely accurate, true, right? Now, there are some others that you've probably heard that aren't. And and Disney is one of the worst at telling stories that aren't true. I mean, they're pretty terrible at it, right? So while I'm on this, I'm going to tell you a few that aren't true. Now, you may have seen a Disney movie called Anastasia, right? Well, I'll talk about Anastasia in a minute, but first I got to talk about, my dog, Rasputin, right? This guy is a trip all the way around. Probably not the greatest guy to hang out with, but I don't know. I mean, maybe he was. Who knows? But Rasputin is in that movie, right? He's supposed to the legend was he put a spell on the royal family and that, all this stuff because of things that happened to him. But here's the deal with Rasputin. The legend told that he couldn't be killed, right? All right. So his background, really quick. The Tsar's family, mainly the Tsarina, which is like the queen of Russia at that time, she just thought this guy was the greatest thing in the world. He's kind of like this soothsayer. He's going to help heal her son, who is a hemophiliac, I believe, like a free bleeder, right? So anyway, he's going to help heal him. He's going to do all these things. He's like this magical kind of guy, and he does look. If you've ever seen pictures of old Rasputin, he looks it. They called him the Mad Monk, and he looks the part for real. He looks like he just crawled out of a dumpster or something, like he's that 1% of stuff that Lysol can't kill. That's kind of what he looks like. Anyway, so he comes in, he ingratiates himself with the royal family, and they just love him, right? He's just hanging out. Now, this does not sit well with the Russian aristocracy, so they're kind of like, we need to get rid of this guy. So this is where it gets kind of mythical because the story goes that they want to kill him, right? They want to kill Rasputin, which that part's true. So they bring him in, and this is the story I like to tell. Unfortunately, it's not true, but you'll see why in a minute. So I like to tell that, all right, so they bring him in and they poison him, right? But that doesn't kill him. So then they shoot him and they shoot him and they shoot him a bunch of times, and that still doesn't do it. He's not dead. So we got to do something with this guy. So they wrap him up. Some stories will say it's in a rug, and somehow they wrap him up, throw him in a barrel, and they throw him in the ocean, right? And the story always was, okay, so this guy actually had freed himself from his bindings and was trying to crawl out of the barrel when he finally died. That's the story. There's only one problem, and is none of it's true. And part of it is. So what really happened, they know, because they examined the body, they did the examination, and this is all more of a old tall tale about old Rasputin, right? So they think what happened. He definitely died of a gunshot wound, right to the head. So likely they shot him in the head, and that was the end of it. No poison was found, right? There was no poison, no evidence of any poisoning at all in Rasputin. Also, he clearly did not drown because there was no water in his lungs. So, in all likelihood, he was shot in the head and died. Pretty easy. But because of Rasputin's, reputation, this was one of those things that was, put out there as a story. Kind of fun. Now, as far as Anastasia goes, you've heard this before. She was the lost princess. She was not murdered with the rest of the Tsar's family during the Bolshevik Revolution, right? Lenin and all that. And the whole idea is that she was able to escape, right? Somehow she was able to escape and make her way, I think, to England is where it was supposed to be. Anyway, so some lady did pop up, right? Some lady did pop up years after and claimed that she was Anastasia. And for the, I guess the scientific measures of the time, they were not able to determine 100% that she wasn't. So it was kind of this legend. Of course, Disney jumps on it and all that. And they make their story and they're dancing and they're carrying on. Anyway, none of that's true. Didn't happen. Anastasia did die. We know that now because the bodies they found, the DNA that was found, it is confirmed. Poor Anastasia did meet her end, which is not fun, but it is true. Now, if I'm on Disney, you cannot forget Pocahontas, right? Oh, Pocahontas. So here's the thing. I mean, poor Pocahontas went through it, right? Now, the story at John Smith shows up and they fall in love and they sing and the animals sing and all this. I don't know what all. I mean, but that was the Disney story. And the story has always been that, there was this great love story between John Smith and Pocahontas. Now, none of that's true. That if John Smith knew Pocahontas, she was like 10 years old when they met. So, no way, no how. And John Smith was an absolute idiot that actually he set off explosives, if I'm not mistaken, that blew himself up, right? And he was such an idiot that they sent him back to England, and this is where he concocts this story. He's the one that wrote it, talking about how much how much Pocahontas loved him, and it was a love story, and blah, 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 blah. None of it's true. It's all crap because she's 10 years old. Now, what is true is a guy who honestly did more for tobacco than Marlboro Lights in the 80s, baby. A guy named John Rolfe. John Rolfe was a huge tobacco planter and actually, started the whole thing. Very, very important for the tobacco industry. For whatever good that is. But he marries Pocahontas when she's very, very young. Teenager, right? Now, there's a question whether or not this was a free will kind of marriage. What we do know is she did become pregnant and have Rolfe's child in England. He takes her back, and then he shows her off to the English people and says, "Look at this noble savage that I have returned, and we have civilized her," and all this garbage, right? So that was what he did, right? He shows her off, like, look at the new world, what it has to offer. It has tobacco, it has sugar, and look at this woman that I brought with me. Anyway. So, but poor Pocahontas dies in her 21, a few years after she has the child, which is an unfortunate thing, completely, obviously, because, it's sad. The girl was, 20 years old. But that's really the story of Pocahontas that is not told. And it's not a lot of fun and games involved with her. Now, one of the things that is also interesting about, Thomas Rolfe was the son, I believe. John Rolfe, of course, married Pocahontas. The son's name was Thomas, if I'm not mistaken. Now, there are descendants from Pocahontas that are still alive today. One is Edward Norton, the actor. Go figure. But one of the more interesting ones that is a descendant of Pocahontas is Edith Wilson. Now, if you don't know the story of Edith Wilson, it's an interesting one because you can make the argument that she was, for a time, the first female president of the United States. What? Now, I mean, not officially, but she did while her husband Woodrow, he had had a massive stroke and was an invalid basically for the last several months of his presidency. She basically run things and kind of run interference for Woodrow, and she was a pretty important person because they tried to hide that. They don't let out a lot of information. They surely didn't back then about the health of the president, and this and that. So it was at a moment in time where Edith was able to have a little bit of power there. So I always like to tell the story about Edith Wilson being the first female president of the United States. Now, of course, everybody's going to correct me now and say, no, she wasn't. And technically, no, she was not. But she was in a position where she was basically answering information that was sent to her as Woodrow, and there's some things in there, some evidence that she did do some things that the president would have done. Now, Woodrow that's another interesting story, because at the end of World War One, Woodrow Wilson was trying to get the Treaty of Versailles passed, and the United States was the only country that didn't pass the Treaty of Versailles. Congress was just not going to do it. A guy named Henry Cabot Lodge hated Woodrow Wilson, absolutely hated him, and he wasn't going to pass it. And he made sure that it didn't pass. And it never did. We never did acknowledge the Treaty of Versailles. And Woodrow Wilson played a huge part in the Treaty of Versailles, right? I mean, with 14 points, if I'm not going to go in the weeds with that, but he did a lot of different things, national self-determination, all that good stuff. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was not necessarily what you would call a huge success in the end, because it kind of starts the road toward World War II. Anyway, we won't go into that. Maybe another time. But Woodrow was trying to get this thing passed. So he was traveling all around the country, and he has a massive stroke, right? So he ends up basically an invalid for the last portion of his term. And Edith Wilson, a descendant of Pocahontas, is actually right there, in the Oval Office, so to speak, right? So that is kind of an interesting thing. But all right, so I got a few things in there today talking about Tom Paine's bones, and ended up all the way to Edith Wilson. How do I do that? It's like a crazy rabbit hole we get into when we start doing these things. It happens. It's a lot of fun, though. So I hope you have as much fun as I do talking these stories and getting into a few things about history and all kind of wonderful nostalgia type things. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any ideas for a podcast, please let me know. I'll do it. I mean, whatever you send me, I'll research it and see what I can find out. So I hope everyone has a fantastic day. And at the time of the release of this, it's going to be Labor Day weekend. So I hope that everyone has a happy Labor Day and enjoy the sun. It's going to be, before you know it, it'll be wintertime. Christmas will be here before you know it. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great day.